right, Johnny Wunder here with golfwrx.com. I am here with the master craftsman, Bob Vokey.
Hey, Johnny, how you doing? I'm doing fantastic.
Well, I want to start here. You know, we could talk about wedges and we can talk about this. I've interviewed a lot of Titleist staff guys, you know, my podcast and this and that. Everybody's a good grinder. There's a lot of good grinders, I'll say that.
No
You
doubt about
seem
it.
to have the best ears in the business. Talk to me a little bit about the kind of the catch words that you're looking to when you're working with a player. Like, what are you listening for?
You know, what it really, I was very fortunate. I'm going all the way back to my former companies before Titleist. I was fortunate to do a lot of work with Seve Ballesteros, Lee Trevino, Dave Stockton Sr., Mark O'Mara. I can go on, all good short game players.
Right.
And I called myself a great, I learned how to listen and take notes. That time I had a little old pad. I still have copies of my little old notepads of all the notes I would take, you know, and I would listen and take. Then I would get where I find out where maybe their strengths are, their weaknesses are, what they're trying to achieve, and I would be able. And I was just, you know what? It's funny, Johnny. People ask me a similar question. I said, you know, I got to where I would just do it, and I can't explain why it would happen. All of a sudden, there it would happen.
Right.
You know, out it would come. I say, there it is. And then I take it to the player, and I learn. Never say no to a player. Always say, I will do it for you. You let me know what you want, but your feedback means very much. Don't be afraid to say something to me that's going to hurt my feelings. I'm going to learn from. I'm going to learn what you want.
Right.
And when I learn what you want, I can please you. Another player with your swing type, I could satisfy him with the same type of grind,
right,
with the type of shots that he's trying to create and hit. And they can be different for every player, different swing types, different techniques. I call upright. You know, you got to watch out for that.
Right.
Put more bounce. Then you got a slider, picker. You can go away with a little less bounce, and find out the shots that they're trying to hit. And as I said earlier, pay attention, listen, and go to the grinder. Start at an area. And remember one thing when you do grinding. You can always take it off, but you can't put it back on.
Yeah.
I always proud. I say, okay, let's hit some more. Boom, take some more off. Now you got a poke, and there I go.
See, I think that's an interesting thing. Let's talk a little bit about, you know, about the grinds and about this. I mean, you've come up with a million different concepts, and you know, this is basically all years of your ears kind of coming out on.
No doubt about it.
And you know, I remember a grind that you did, I think it was the 260-08, which for me was the ultimate lob wedge.
No doubt about it.
So let's just talk specifically about that wedge for as an example.
Yeah.
Where did that grind come from? Because that was a new grind when it came out to the market, not necessarily on tour, but to the market.
New to the market, but it came out again from doing a little bit of work with the guys that Lee liked that particular grind. He loved that. He was a one wedge player, but when he dabbled with a more lofted wedge, a 58 or a 60, it was a simpler grind they did for him, and I did a little bit of it with Seve. And the 260-08 came from the 260-06 was the wedge that a lot of players played with back when, and Tiger really liked that wedge too. Right. Back when he, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s.
The Titleist days.
Titleist days, yes. He loved that wedge, and I found out that if I had any negative with it, it didn't quite have enough bounce for the player. So I made it 2 more degrees of bounce, and that's how the 260-08 came about. I call it, it was the son of the 06. The 06. Yeah. And that's how they start. That's how all my grinds come from. They come from a variation of working with tour players. They would want something, and I used to take off the leading edge toe for where it trails off. I did that for Lanny Watkins, and for Lee and Seve, I took the heel and trailing edge off, and that came what the M grind came about from.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's how they all come from doing that, and somebody else would see the M grind, and then they would say they'd want a little bit different. They like that, but they want a little something different. So away I go. Then all of a sudden, they all come from doing grinds, and all come L grind, working with Lefty. The L grind stood for was Phil when he was with us, and he was a great wedge player, and that was how that came about, working with Phil, and then working with them all, the E grinds, the B grinds. They all come from working with different players.
Well, you've had the unique opportunity. I was actually talking to Charles Hall about this. I mean, you're working with a man that has pretty much had everybody come through his grind shop.
No doubt.
I mean, there isn't one guy that I can think of, maybe There's one guy I can think of that hasn't had, your hands on their wedge.
I've been fortunate.
And the one thing that I find actually kind of curious is, the conception is that better players like less bounce.
Yes,
and the most iconic wedges that you built for some of these tour players actually are packed with a lot of bounce.
No doubt about it.
So let's talk a little bit about bounce and what you see on the wedge versus what's actually effective and useful.
Everybody, first off, bounce has to know bounce 101. It's the angle between the leading edge and the trailing edge. A little bit more bounce, going to offer a little bit more resistance to digging.
Right.
It's just like a rudder going across the water like that. It keeps you from digging, and that's good for somebody with a more of an upright swing. Then you get somewhat a little bit more of a shallow type swing. It takes a little, I call it picker of the ball. He can get away with a little less bounce by the nature of his swing. So you watch that. You're taking a look at that. But he still needs bounce. Bounce, you'll hear me say, I'll go on record, say, bounce is your friend. But the right amount of bounce and grind to do that. But I'm a firm believer. I've always loved bounce. And I don't automatically default to bounce, but the old thing that I really like to do, I always like to have sand wedges with a little bit more bounce. It's classic what I like to do. So you can hit a lot of shots with your sand wedge. That was even before lob wedges came out. Then lob wedges originally came out, they had a little less bounce. They were meant for a lot of greenside shots, trouble shots, specialty wedge. But then all of a sudden, a lot of players wanted to start using it further on out, and they found out they didn't have enough bounce they were digging. So that's when I had to come out with 60s with a little bit more bounce. That could perform in the bunker, and also perform greenside, and also perform on the full shots and quarter shots, and give them the proper trajectory.
Well, you have guys like, you've had guys like Rocco Media, like 75 Steros, those guys use 56
all the time, exclusively.
And
exclusively.
Do you think? This is kind of an odd question, but do you think the 60-degree wedge actually hindered the ability of the imagination because it made something? The 56, the guys that could use a 56 were craftsmen.
You're preaching to the choir. Every time I talk, when I do my talks, I go. Everybody's there's Bob. He's on his sand wedge crusade.
Right.
I think a sand wedge is the least used club in a player's bag. They automatically default to the lob wedge, and I firmly believe, I've talked to players, they said they can spin, who use the sand wedge, they can spin their sand wedge greenside more than they can their lob wedge. And it's because it's the angle, of course, and you can do, it's a higher percentage club to use greenside than the lob wedge. Of course, tour players can use it because they hit thousands of balls. They can do it, but I call the average avid golfer, weekend golfer, I don't think he should be using. He should be default to a sand wedge more than anything else. I'm a firm believer in that.
There's just a less chance for error, I guess.
No doubt about it.
Even if you stick it in the ground, it's
you're going to get away with it. What's going to, instead of having with your lob wedge, if you hit a perfect lob wedge, you may have a 5-foot putt. You turn around but if you miss
or a 40-yard chip.
Oh, you're in the bunker. Where a sand wedge, you're not going to do that. You're going to get over. You may have a 10-foot putt, but you're never going to miss it. You'll miss it, but just depending how much you practice.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about the tour. So like I said, you've worked with pretty much everybody, but I'm a big believer that Jordan Spieth actually is sort of like a wedge savant. His golf IQ is through the roof. Whether he's playing amazing or bad, it doesn't really matter. His wedge game always seems to be on point. So you get a kid like that at a young age. I think probably in that case being 14, 15 years old when you probably first met him. You see a player that can manipulate bounce and manipulate the leading edge and really understands how to fly the golf ball at that age. How do you start to develop that relationship with somebody like Jordan, and how does it evolve as you go?
He just evolved. He basically is playing very similar right now. He's got a 46, 52, 56, and a 60. That's what he played in school did. But at that particular time, he even had a low bounce wedge. And long time when he was in college. I first met him when he was in college. And I never forget, he came to work the tournament at Byron Nelson. He was 16 years old. And that's when I really first met him. But I used to work with him, made clubs for him through Philip James, who was our rep worth the college at the time. And I remember Jordan, and he would tell me, I'm working with this kid, watch out, this kid is good. And when I first met him, I said, he's good. What I like about him, he uses all wedges. He doesn't use lobber. He uses lobber, his sand wedge, his 52, his 46. He does all the different little shots that he's got. And one thing he's very good about, he knows what a wedge. There's a lot of people start thinking about leading edge.
That was my next question.
There's time to use leading edge. But you'll always hear me say, you got to know how to use the trailing edge. What's that mean, Bo? Use the bounce. Trailing edge. A lot of guys, they start shaft leaning. Some tour players, but also I call the avid golfer too, your average weekend golfer, they start leaning it. The leaning edge starts digging in. You get, I like about a 3 to 7 shaft lean angle to give it.
Yep.
But these guys are leaning sometimes 14, 15 degrees. What's that leading edge doing? Boom, they're taking bounce off it, sticking in the ground. Yeah. I tell them, use the trailing edge. How do you get to use the trailing edge? Little ball placement, hands back a little bit where you can use the bounce. And you can hit it off of this table if you have your hands in the right position.
Well, I've seen him, you know, we talked about the 56. Yes. I've seen him around the green short-sided take out a 56 and open it up because the bounce is going to help him in that shot.
That's exactly
so I think that stuff to me is just, you never hear about it on TV, but that's the genius.
That's the genius of guys like Seve was one way. Trevino was one way.
Hey, I named my son after Seve Ballesteros, so.
I made a wedge for Lee, and I still do. I make him a 56 degree bent to 57 with 16 degrees of bounce.
He does all right with that thing.
And he does all right.
Okay, last 3 questions. There's kind of short answer questions.
Okay.
Favorite golf course to play?
To play would be, it's a course called Highland Links. Highland Links, it's up in Cape Breton Island in Canada. Being a former Canadian.
I got it.
So many good golf courses. I love that course because the setting where it is, it was just phenomenal.
That's your course. Okay.
It was course.
What wedges do you have? What wedges does Bob Vokey have in the bag?
Actually I have 5, including the wedge I'm playing with the new concept irons that we have right now.
Saw them, they're beautiful.
You saw them, I have those. No, I know somebody. And it's a pitching wedge, but a pitching wedge, I treat it just like a 9-iron. Then I have a 48, 52, 56, and a 60. But I hit 90% of my shots greenside
56
with my 56.
Okay, and this is a loaded question.
Okay.
Best wedge player you've ever worked with?
Seve?
Hands down.
Didn't take long, did it?
He's laying down the truth. Mr. Vokey, I appreciate your time.
All right, thank you.
It's Bob Vokey with Titleist. It's Johnny Wunder with GolfWRX.com. That was awesome. Thanks.